Hey guys.
Hi, everybody.
So this week we're coming to you live from Lisbon, Portugal. Last week we were in Madrid, this week we're in Lisbon. So coincidentally we're in the capital of Portugal this week, and the capital of Spain last week. But we're moving all around. We'll actually be back in Spain next week. So it's been a pretty cool trip so far. We've really enjoyed Portugal and Spain. They're awesome places. We definitely recommend, especially Portugal if you guys have never been. But this week we're going to be talking about travel therapy contract bill rates. It's something we get a lot of questions about because a lot of people wonder how much do the travel therapy companies get paid by the facility, and how much of that do they pass on to the traveler versus how much of that do they keep.
Yep. So we'll give you guys some introductions. Jared will get this article or this video shared in a couple groups. And for those of you guys, as you sign on, or if you're watching it later, if you would just comment below and let us know that you're tuning in. We're going to try to be a little bit quiet because we are at our Airbnb in Portugal, and so we don't want to be too loud with our host in the next room. If you are tuning in live, if you could just let us know if you can hear us or not. We'll do our best to speak up to you guys. We also have the window open because it's a little bit hot in here and there's no AC.
Yep.
So hopefully that's not too loud.
Yeah, that's apparently a very common thing in Spain and Portugal is no AC, which actually hasn't been that bad. I was nervous, but then again, I guess it's spring, so.
Yeah. So, like Jared said, we're going to talk to you guys a little bit about contract bill rates and what that means for you as a travel therapist. Sorry about yesterday. We were trying to come at you guys live on our regular Sunday evenings, but we had some problems yesterday and we weren't able to make it work. So hopefully, we can get it back on Sundays and get it going. We are going to keep doing it at this earlier time, unfortunately, because of the time difference here in Europe compared to the US. It's 10 p.m. here in Portugal, whereas I know it's 5 on the East Coast. So, but yeah, we're going to jump in and start talking about travel therapy bill rates. So if anybody is tuning in, I see Lauren is on, we got a couple people on. If anybody knows what a bill rate is, see if you can give us a definition.
Yeah.
If you want to type it in the comments, check your knowledge and see if you know. But we'll get into talking about exactly what that is and why it matters. So the bill rate is the amount of money that the facility pays the travel company. So it's the money that the hospital or the skilled nursing facility or the outpatient facility or whatever it might be, it's the amount of money that they are putting forward, and they're paying it to the travel company, who then has to take out costs and pay the traveler. So this is kind of getting into the more advanced stuff of travel therapy and understanding how the pay works. So you don't always have to understand this in the beginning. You don't have to know all the ins and outs of it, but it is good to have a general concept of what it is, so you can, as a travel therapist, can understand where your pay is coming from, and why, maybe you're making this amount for this job, but you made this amount for this other job, or that sort of thing. So yeah, the bill rate, again, is the amount of money that the facility pays the staffing agency or the travel company. Okay, so what?
So that's commonly referred to as like the total pot of money. So that's everything that the travel company makes and everything that we make as travelers all comes from that one amount. That
Mm-hmm.
one, and it's a dollar amount per hour.
Yep. So the travel or the facility pays the travel company in just a dollar amount. So what might this dollar amount be? Okay, so we pulled a few different travel companies to find out kind of the behind the scenes information for you guys. And we've learned just through talking to our different recruiters, as well as our experience and talking to other travelers, the bill rate is typically somewhere between for a PT and OT or a speech therapist between about $60 to $80 an hour. An average would be somewhere between like maybe $62 to $72 an hour.
Yeah, we've seen them as low as like 55 and as high as 85 in some places like California, and it also depends on the setting. So
Mm-hmm.
it can go really high or really low. Like some PEDS contracts and things like that might be pretty low, but yeah, they can go pretty high as well.
Yeah, and of course these numbers are going to be a little bit lower for a PTA or a CODA. But a good average number to think about is that, say there's about $62 to $72 available in this pot of money that the facility pays the travel company. So then you're thinking, okay, well, how come I'm not seeing that $72 an hour? Why am I not making that much? Because if I do the math, I'm not making anywhere near that much.
Yep.
So we want to talk about a little bit of what all has to come out of that bill rate once the facility pays the travel company.
Yeah. So the major things. So say let's use an example of like $60 an hour. That's a easy number. So the bill rate's $60 an hour. The contract company is being paid by the facility $60 an hour. Say out of that, the traveler gets 45. Somewhere between 40 and 45 would probably be pretty normal. So then, yeah, where does that extra $15 or $20 an hour go? Well, the main places are the company has to make a profit, of course. They have to pay their employees. They have to pay for their overhead. They have to pay the recruiter's salary. They have to pay, their rent fees and utilities and all that on the buildings that they have. They have to pay for marketing. So, all the ads you see, especially as new grads, too low. All the ads and things you see, they pay for that marketing. They also pay for, I don't know if do you guys have any idea about FICA taxes, what FICA taxes are?
I don't.
Yeah, Whitney had no idea about this. I actually didn't understand this until a few years ago. But FICA taxes are basically your Social Security and your Medicare taxes. And as W-2 employees, which we are as travelers, we pay for half of those taxes up front. So you see on your paycheck, it'll be like 7.65% goes between Medicare and Social Security. So we pay that amount towards our future Medicare and Social Security, and then the travel company pays the same amount on our behalf. So some of that money goes there. They also pay for liability insurance for us. They pay for health insurance options. They have to offer 401k plans that have fees, and usually they'll provide some sort of match, hopefully. Let's see what else goes into that.
So those are like a lot of the operating costs. Those are the big things to look at from a company side of things, is what operating costs do they have to take out off the top before they can pay us, which are the employees. So like Jared said, they have to pay the recruiters, they have to pay their building facility costs to run their business, and then they also have to earn a profit. That's why recruiting companies are in business, is to earn a profit. So a lot of these things that we're getting at is so that you guys understand that when the company has to take a part of our pay, it's to keep their business up and running. Otherwise, yes, a lot of people ask, like, couldn't you just negotiate your own contracts and keep more of that money for yourself? Yes, but you're also going to deal with a lot more of the hassles of negotiating your own contracts and your own rates, doing your own insurance. You have to pay 100% of the employment taxes, whereas they pay part of your taxes. You don't get the benefits of having a group rate for your insurance.
You don't get stipends, so that's the big reason that I think a lot of people don't realize that, is when we're travelers, we get these stipends that are tax-free for housing, meals, incidentals, right? Sometimes, or most of the time, those stipends will be significantly more than the actual cost of those things. So like, say we get $800 a week for housing. Normally we're not spending $800 a week unless you're in a very high cost living area. So that means you get to keep some of that money, right? If you are an independent contractor and you do the same thing, you would get all that money taxed. So if you're a 1099 employee, you get all that money taxed. You'd be able to write off your housing costs, but you could only write off the actual amount of the rent. So say your rent is $1,000 a month. You can only write off $1,000 a month. Whereas as a traveler working through a travel company, $800 a week times 4 weeks is $3,200 in a month. So I mean, there's a big difference there in how much you could get tax-free, depending on your situation.
Yeah. So if you guys are not familiar, sorry, there's a little bit of traffic outside making noise. If you guys don't understand the ins and outs of exactly how the pay packages work, we have other videos and articles on that kind of explain that. But hopefully by now you guys have learned how the pay works as a travel therapist when you work through a travel company. So the facility pays the travel company in an hourly number, $75 an hour, $65 an hour, whatever. But then the travel company, after taking out their overhead or their operating costs, off the top of that, whatever they're left with, then they pay you, but they don't just pay you $45 an hour tax. They pay you Part of it taxed and part of it untaxed, which is a huge benefit of being a traveler.
It's a benefit for us. It's also a benefit for them because they pay less taxes on our behalf, which is good
Yeah.
good for them as well.
So it's not really like you're just getting $45 an hour tax like you would if you were a PRN or if you were an independent contractor. You're really getting a lot more than that after taxes because of the benefit of the stipend. So these are just some things to think about what has to come out of that bill rate. And the big thing is a lot of people want to know, am I getting screwed over? Why is the company keeping so much? And you have to understand from a business perspective, there are certain operating costs they have to keep money for.
Yeah.
Now,
So two more things that go into that. One is reimbursement. So a lot of people look at their weekly pay, but they don't look at the upfront and sometimes at the end also reimbursement. So things like licensing reimbursements and reimbursements for background checks, drug tests. Sometimes the company will they'll actually cover that cost on their own, which obviously they have to keep money to cover it, or they'll reimburse you for it. So they have to have a separate pile of money, I guess, to reimburse those costs. That also includes travel to and from assignment locations. So when all those things are considered, those are only one-time costs per contract, but that can still be a significant amount. It can be $1,200 to $1,400 sometimes. So, or even more. And then another thing that goes into that is cancellations. So companies, they don't know, and us as travelers, we don't know when we're going to get canceled from a contract. So we look at it from our point of view. That really stinks when you get canceled from a contract and you have to find another job. It's terrible for us. It's also terrible for the company though, the travel company, because they don't get paid for the hours that we don't work. So they miss out on, say you get canceled halfway through the contract, they miss out on half of the contract's worth of pay, but they still had to put in those upfront costs, right? So they have to have a separate account basically to plan for that. So they keep a certain percentage for those events where a cancellation occurs or someone leaves the contract early or whatever.
So we've got a lot more detail to get into, but I see that a lot more people have joined on. If you guys have joined on, we'd love if you'd just say hi below and ask any questions that you may have. We're going to talk a few more details about exactly how this works and what you really need to take home from this, the key points to take home from this as a traveler for understanding how you can make the most money. But we'd love if you would just say hi and ask us any questions that you have. I see Lauren is on. Hi Lauren, hi Quintez, hi Caroline.
Yeah, and if you guys could like or love this video so more people see it, that would be awesome.
Yeah.
The more people that like it while we're live, the more people it shows up in their newsfeed.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and especially I know that this time wasn't ideal for everybody, so I'm hoping that more people will be able to watch it later on the replay, even though it's not as many people are able to tune in live tonight. So it looks like Caroline wants to know, how do the recruiters get paid? Do they get a percentage of the hourly bill rate? That's a really good question, Caroline.
So every company is different. I've talked to a few different ones about that, but they all are a version of some sort of salary, probably pretty low, maybe in the $20,000 to $30,000 range, not a huge salary, but then they usually get reimbursed or they get paid a commission based on what hours the travelers work as well. So it might be something like they get paid, just to make it easy numbers, $1 an hour for every hour that you work as a traveler. So they would have their base pay, and then they would be getting paid a commission for each travel they have. So, sometimes recruiters can make a lot of money if they have a lot of consistent travelers working with them. 30 or 40 on a contract, if they're getting paid $1 an hour from each one, that's awesome.
Yeah, but it just varies by company, and sometimes they're willing to share that information, and sometimes they're not.
Yeah.
And that's something else important to know about this whole bill rate thing. So Jared and I have been travel therapists for about 4 years. Most of you guys who are tuning in, I think, know who we are, but there are some people who don't know. We are both traveling physical therapists. And so for our first couple of years, we didn't know all these details. We just kind of went with the flow, and we just went with whatever the recruiters told us. Now that we've been doing it for a lot longer, and we are doing these informational videos, we ask a lot more questions. So we've learned a lot about the behind-the-scenes stuff, which has helped us as travelers in our own contract, and it has helped us be able to tell you guys more information. So I would say for the most part, the recruiters are never usually going to tell you what the bill rate is. They're not going to say,
Very
hey,
rarely.
Hey Heather, the bill, this job is paying $70 an hour, and then take home you're going to get this weekly. They don't usually tell you that, and it's not that big of a deal.
It's not that big of a deal, but the problem is when you hear a number like $70 an hour, we hear this all the time. as a recruiter or as a therapist, if you find, so what happened for me one time, I had in one of my contracts, I had a bill that was addressed to me as the traveler, or it was addressed to the facility. So it was a bill from my travel company to the facility, but it had my travel company name on it. So the office person at the contract just gave it to me. So I opened it and it had my contract with the amount that they were getting paid on it, right? So I saw what the bill rate was. And so you see this big number, right? And you're like, man, why am I getting paid this if the bill rate's really this? So they don't want to, it's not that they're trying to hide things. It's just that there's so much that goes into a contract that it's hard to conceptualize how much they actually have to keep for them to actually be profitable as a business, right? So they don't want to just give out that number most of the time, because it might make some therapists resentful or think they're being taken advantage of, when actually might not be.
Yeah.
So, you know, if the bill rate's $7 an hour and you're only getting 50, you feel like that's bad, but in reality, that's pretty decent.
Yeah. So we've just asked some of these more detailed questions just to learn for our own knowledge, but don't be concerned if you don't know what the bill rate is. You usually won't. Or if you ask your recruiter and they don't feel comfortable telling you, they usually don't. Gosh, I had one recruiter I asked and they were like, "You're literally the first person who's ever asked me that, and I usually don't tell people this. This is kind of weird, but I guess I can tell you." And I was like, "Yeah, it would just be interesting to know, you know, how the money is broken down." But it's not that big of a deal. We're more or so just telling you guys to conceptualize it and understand, you know, where the money comes from. A big thing to know about this too is sometimes we see therapists like on these online forums on Facebook and stuff saying, "I should be making this," or "I want to be making this." But you also have to understand there's only so much money to go around. The travel therapy company can't just give you a whole bunch more money if it's not there to give.
Yep.
So I've honestly had some recruiters where I tried to just push the limits just a little bit and say, "Well, is there any more money to pay for this?" And for the sake of full transparency, they were just like, "No, like, to be honest, this is the bill rate. It's a really low bill rate because of the area or because of the setting or because of the whatever." And they were just super upfront about it, and I really appreciated that honesty and that transparency, and it helps me to understand, well, yeah, they just can't really pay me any more money for this because this is how much they're getting paid. So that's something to think about. So what else was I gonna say? Yeah, just lost my train of thought. So what else? The overtime rates, the blended rates. Jared?
So I guess we could talk a little bit about blended rates. Have you guys heard of blended rates? I think we mentioned that in articles before, probably mentioned it in past videos, but I don't think we've gone into too much detail what that is. But so basically the blended rate would be your hourly rate, so say $20 an hour taxable, plus your reimbursements broken down into an hourly rate. And so say that you're getting $1,000 a week in reimbursements for housing, meals, and incidentals. That would be $25 an hour, which would be, so your blended rate there would be $20 an hour taxable plus the $25 an hour reimbursements would be $45 an hour would be your blended rate. So that's something that would go in, it makes sense to talk about here, because if you don't understand what that number is, that's commonly referred to in the travel therapy world as your total pay. It's your blended rate between the reimbursements and the hourly rate.
It doesn't really matter what that number is, but if you like to, like, especially for people who are just getting into travel and they like to try to think about comparing the amount they're making to what like their peers are making at a permanent job, or what they've made in the past at a permanent job, or what they've made at a PRN position, sometimes that blended rate is more accurate to try to look at your total pay instead of, like, obviously we make $20 an hour taxable. That's not accurate, because then we also get this $900 or $1,000 a week non-tax. So it's like, how do you conceptualize it? So a blended rate is just a way to think about it in your head as like an hourly rate.
Yeah, and I guess an important distinction to make there is that the untaxed portion, the stipends, are not actually part of our
Salary.
Yeah. So basically, in terms of taxes and the tax laws and everything, that's not part of our compensation. That is purely a reimbursement. But it makes more sense in our terms if we make it into a blended rate, combining those two.
Yeah. So the next thing that we want to talk about is how this goes into, if, for example, an overtime rate. So sometimes you want to look at that blended rate to understand what would be an accurate overtime rate, because a lot of times your overtime rate would only be 1.5 times your hourly rate, which isn't necessarily, from our perspective, making overtime worth it. And this is a conversation that's we're kind of veering off in a different direction.
We've made a video about this overtime rates before as well.
But yeah, you would want to think of hopefully your overtime rate as more of like 1.5 times your blended rate or 2 times your blended rate.
That's probably the most important application of the blended rate, is figuring out what a fair overtime rate would be. So normally you want somewhere at least the blended rate itself. So say that $45 an hour number I was saying, for overtime you want to at least be making that much, but hopefully more than that. So maybe $60 an hour instead of 45, or 1.5 times the blended rate would be great.
Yeah. Okay, so when I had brain fog earlier, now I remember what I was going to talk about. So talking a little bit more about the bill rate and what comes out of that. So something else that's interesting to know, just for our own purposes, is how much is the travel company typically taking out? Like, what is usually their overhead or the amount that they're taking out for their margins? So after polling a few different companies, I found out that a typical margin is about between 20 to 25% of the bill rate is about how much companies keep. So to put this in numbers, we said earlier that an average bill rate might be between $62 to $72 an hour. So an average of that would be 68, right? 62.
Yeah, just use 68.
So we'll say 68, 67 would be like an average bill rate. So if you have $67 on average available from the facility, and you have to take out 25% on the high end for the company margins. So we'd multiply that by 0.75. So they would have about $50 on average to work with to then pay you.
Yep.
Or if it was on the higher end of that, 68 times 80% would be $54. Is about how much on average they would have to work with to pay you.
Yeah, but like I mentioned earlier, that wouldn't just be your weekly pay. That would also include any reimbursements that you got up front or at the end. It would usually include things like drug tests that they pay for and things on your behalf, licenses, things like that.
Yeah, so you have to look at it in terms of your total pay package, not just your weekly pay. But something important here to note is just when you're talking about like whether or not you're getting taken advantage of or how much the recruiter has control over your pay, they typically have these margins that the company expects them to keep between 20 and 25%. Sometimes they have the ability to play around with those numbers and maybe put it more on the end of like only keeping 20% or 21% rather than keeping 25%. But it just depends on the recruiter. It depends on the company.
Yeah. There usually is a little bit of wiggle room.
Right, but so that kind of is how it plays into how the recruiter controls your pay.
Yeah, and that's where negotiating happens, is usually in that wiggle room, because most of the time the facility is not going to raise the bill rate. Sometimes they will if they're desperate, but usually they'll have, say they have like 2 or 3 candidates, they're not going to pay you $70 an hour when they have people applying for the same job at 65, right? So they're usually not going to increase that. So the only wiggle room for the negotiation for higher pay potentially is that few percent of margin there.
Right, so what Jared's saying there is if you're trying to negotiate pay, typically your travel company is not going to go back to the facility and ask for more money. Sometimes they can, and we'll talk about the occasion when that might happen. Most of the time, the facility says we're going to pay this amount for this job, and they have all these candidates that apply for the job. You apply for it, somebody else from this other company applies for it, somebody else from this other company applies for it, and if they post the rate at $68 an hour, and this other traveler over here is willing to take it at $68 an hour, your company has no room to go back and ask the facility to hire you at $70 an hour so that they can pay you more money. So where the negotiation happens more is between you and the travel company, where you try to see if they can take a lower margin so you can keep more of the money.
Yeah.
However, there are some instances where say if you have a really good relationship with your recruiter, I've had this conversation before where they say like, we can see that nobody else is submitted, or we can see that you have really high qualifications for this job, or say you've worked at that facility before and they already know you and they really want you there. We've had that happen before where we got called back to the same facility. Now your company knows that you all have negotiating power, and they actually have said we can submit you and request a higher bill rate from the facility to get more money for
Yeah,
this.
and that's good for everyone. The facility doesn't have to train you as much. They know that you already know their system, how things work there. So they're going to save some money by having you, build more units in the first couple weeks that you're there. So they'll potentially make more money off of you. So they're willing to usually pay a little higher. So then that way we make more, and everybody kind of wins there, which is great.
Yeah. The other thing to think about too is I have heard some recruiters, and again, some recruiters don't talk to you guys about this stuff, but because we've been doing this for longer and we've known our recruiters for a long time and we ask a lot of these in-depth questions, they'll tell us some of this behind the scenes stuff. So I've actually heard from some recruiters, they'll say that the facility will post a range of a bill rate that they're going to offer. So the facility will say that we're going to pay between $65 to $68 an hour depending on the candidate. And so occasionally, if they know, for example, if it's like home health or SNF, and they know you're going to need a lot more ramp up time and a lot more training, or if it's a new grad, then they'll say, yeah, we're not going to pay that same bill rate for that new grad because we know they're going to need a lot more training. So
Yeah.
sometimes people will say that this like new grad pay is being lower is a myth. In some cases it is, and in some cases you need to be cautious of shady recruiters telling you that it's just they can only pay you this amount. But if the recruiter is honest and they're saying the facility is only paying a lower bill rate because you are, or the facility came back and said we're going to pay a lower bill rate because you're a new grad, sometimes that's the truth.
Yeah, we made a video on that a couple months ago. So if you're more interested in how much you can expect to make as a new grad, check that video out.
Yeah.
So we got some questions. We're going to answer those questions. If you guys have any other questions, feel free to ask them. Again, please like, heart on this video so more people see it. That'd be awesome.
Yeah.
We got one more thing we want to talk about before we answer the questions though, and that's I think is that the last thing we want to talk about, the VMS.
Oh, right.
About that.
Oh, yeah, we talked about a little bit earlier about percentages. So
Okay, so the VMS, VMSs are basically vendors where jobs are posted on.
it's like a database.
So a lot of jobs come from these VMS sites. So imagine that you're a hospital. You don't want to contact, say, 20 different travel companies and offer, say, we need this position filled, because that would be a hassle. You'd be getting submissions from all these different people, right? So basically what a VMS is, a vendor management system, is the hospital will list their job on this website. And then the vendor management system is like a screening tool, basically, where they will get offers from all the different companies. They'll pick the candidates to actually present to the hospital so that the hospital doesn't have to do all that themselves. Well, in turn, that VMS takes a percentage of the pay from that bill rate, and usually that will be 5% or so. So the company itself might be keeping 20 to 25%. The VMS might be getting 5%. Which means that ultimately you might be getting 70% of what the bill rate is as your blended rate that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
So that's another thing to consider. And the majority of jobs, I don't know, maybe 80 to 90% of jobs are going to be coming from a VMS like that. So so you have to take that into account.
Mm-hmm. So the difference here is there are certain jobs that are available to certain recruiting agencies or travel companies that are called direct clients or exclusive contracts. For example, one company that we work with is AMN. So AMN is a huge company that controls a lot of jobs and controls a lot of the market. So AMN has a lot more direct clients or exclusive jobs than some of the other companies. So they don't all have to pay fees to VMSs to get jobs. They just already have these exclusive jobs with them. So sometimes they might be able to pay a little higher because they don't have to pay that fee. However, because it's a really big company, maybe they have to keep a bigger margin. So maybe it ends up being about equal. It just depends.
Exactly. Sometimes you can get the best of both worlds though. If you have a small company that reaches out directly to clients in their area. So we have a couple companies that we work with directly that are smaller that do this. So they might reach out, say, directly to a chain of outpatient clinics and say like, hey, if you guys ever need help staffing someone temporarily, let me know. And so then they have a direct relationship with that client. Well, that's perfect, because then the smaller company has lower overhead. They also don't have to take that job through a VMS, so there's less hands in the pot, so to say, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that means that a lot of those jobs pay really well. The small company takes a lower margin, there's nothing going to VMS. You might keep 80% of the bill rate, which is really, really awesome.
Yeah. So these are just some various things for you guys, honestly, just to help you understand where the money comes from. You don't have to sit here and hound your recruiters every time and ask them what's the bill rate and did you get it through VMS and blah 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 blah. But these are just some things for you to understand, like where the money comes from, where the money goes. And it's not just that the recruiters are always out to get you or out to keep part of the money. It's just that everybody has to get paid.
Yeah, some of them are though, so you do have to be cautious. It's very difficult to know, but as you go through it more, if you guys ever have any questions about like if you know what the bill rate is and you know what you're getting paid and you want to ask us if it sounds reasonable, feel free to do that.
Yeah, so we're going to go through some questions now. If you guys have any more questions, please comment below. Even if you guys are watching it on the replay, if you want to comment on the video or send us a direct message, we'd be happy to help.
Yep.
Okay.
So Nina says, hi, how many contracts do you usually take a year? What are some things that would be red flags when talking to a recruiter or when interviewing for a contract position? So we are not the normal travelers anymore. We initially were taking 3 to 4 contracts a year, usually 4 contracts a year for our first 3 years working. Now we're only doing probably 1 contract a year. We did 2 last year, we've only done 1 this year, and we don't plan to work anymore this year. We're traveling now internationally for another 3 months.
For fun.
For
yeah,
fun.
So Nina, if you're not familiar with our story, you can learn more about our story on fifthwheelpt.com, or our Fifth Wheel PT is our blog, as well as we post some about it on our Travel There.
But we're going to be traveling internationally. We're going to be probably doing a road trip around the U.S. To see some national parks and things, but we'll probably work again next year for 1 contract, but usually 1 contract a year is what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, but I'd say typically the majority of travelers, Nina, work
probably
3 to 4 13-week contracts a year. Most travelers work year-round.
Yeah, they're usually working somewhere between 40 and 45 weeks a year. I would say it's pretty normal.
Yeah. So what are some things some red flags to look out for when talking to a recruiter? So we actually have, I can share with you after this an article that says like which questions and things to look out for with certain recruiters. We can also give you recommendations on certain recruiters that we've had good luck with. If you'd be interested in that, if anybody listening wants to hear the recruiters we've had good luck with, just comment recruiter on the video. But some red flags are generally you kind of just have to have a couple conversations with them. One red flag is we recommend working with more than one. So if they are being territorial or being catty or just being unprofessional and saying, oh, you shouldn't be working with another recruiter, you should only work with me, bad sign. They should be comfortable with you as a professional working with more than one company because that's the best situation for you. Second,
I would say another big one is how quickly they get back to you. That's probably one of the more important things. You can have the best recruiter in the world, but if they're not getting back to you quickly when you ask questions or if you have concerns, it's going to be really difficult when it comes time to submit for jobs. So yeah, that's a big red flag.
So communication is important. Generally, you just kind of get a feel for whether they're being honest, whether they're being open and upfront, or whether they're withholding information. If you have a lot of questions and they're not willing to answer your questions, that's a bad sign.
Yeah, it's really difficult on an interview if you're interviewing recruiters because all of them are really, almost all of them are very good talkers. So they're able to, it sounds great usually when you talk to someone. They're telling you all the stuff you want to hear, and that can be great, but it can just be all talk. You never know. So in that first conversation, it's really hard. You won't see a lot of red flags usually then, but over multiple conversations, you might.
Yeah. So talking about interviewing for a contract position, that's kind of off topic, and there's a whole lots of red flags to look out for, and it's kind of facility dependent. But again, I can link to an article about interview questions to ask.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jonathan wants to know, is the weekly pay different than the total pay? So I think earlier, he commented this when I was talking about understanding the pay package as a whole versus just understanding your weekly pay. So what I was talking about there, Jonathan, is you're going to get a weekly pay, which is going to be broken down into an hourly plus a stipend. Now, you also want to consider what all they're paying you for the total contract. So sometimes they'll pay you relocation fees, which are like the costs that it costs you up front to get from, like, say you live in Texas and the job is in Hawaii, like the relocation costs. They might also pay for your license. They might also pay for CEUs, things like that. Sometimes they'll do like a car allowance or a scrub allowance or that sort of thing. So you have to take into account how much money they're giving you total for the whole pay package, which includes reimbursements and things like that, in addition to the pay you're getting paid every week.
Yeah, that's a good question. It is different. A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that their weekly pay is all they're getting paid, but they forget about all the other reimbursements. We made a video about that. It's called the intangible benefits of travel contracts, talking about all the little things that some companies pay for that others don't, which makes a big difference in your total compensation.
Yeah, which makes it really tricky if you're comparing job A to job B, because job A, they might just lump it all into your weekly pay, and so you might have higher weekly pay, but they might give you 0 reimbursements, whereas company B might pull out some money here and there to give you reimbursements, but then that brings your total weekly pay down.
Yeah, and just as an example, real quick, we've had situations where a contract, we might go with a company that's paying us $100 a week less because we like the benefits so much more, and the reimbursements and all those things are more valuable to us, or 40-hour guarantees that are guaranteed no matter what, like holidays or low census or inclement weather or anything like that. So there's some things that go into the pay that aren't just in that weekly number. So.
Yeah, or some people really prefer to have like an upfront reimbursement for relocation or licensing, because say you got canceled. Well, if they had grouped all that money back into your weekly pay spread out over 13 weeks, but you got canceled after 4 weeks, then you wouldn't have gotten that upfront money for your licensing and your relocation. So it's all on how you want your pay to look.
Yeah.
Okay. Quintez wants to know what's negotiable when taking a new travel contract. I'm a travel PT that's in Arkansas. Is more experience or certifications as a way to ask for more?
Sometimes, not always though. There's definitely a lot of situations we were talking about before where a job might have 4 candidates. So they might be willing to raise the bill rate if you have certifications and experience, but usually they won't. They'll just go with the person that has less experience but will take the job for that same amount.
Yeah.
Because from their perspective, your experience and your certifications are great, but the person without that can still bill the same amount and make the same amount for the facility.
Yeah, and sometimes just short term, they're just looking for somebody to fill the gap. They don't necessarily care as much if it's the most qualified person, as long as they meet the minimum qualifications. So you don't always have more negotiating power if you have more experience or more certifications the way you would with a permanent job.
But it's always worth trying. Yeah, use that as a bargaining chip. Like, okay, I've been in this setting for a long time. I'm going to be able to jump right in. You can always use those things, and hopefully you can get more that way. It's also always a great way to negotiate is saying, okay, I've already gotten this offer from this other company, and can you guys match that, or can you get closer to this amount?
And that's more negotiating with your travel recruiter and your company, not negotiating with like the person who interviewed you.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's kind of 2 negotiations that happen there. One with the facility by the travel company, where they're submitting different bill rates, and then there's negotiation between you as a traveler and the travel company, trying to negotiate that margin we were talking about. So always try to use that stuff if you can, but it may or may not actually work out.
Yeah. Okay, so Lauren says, what do you suggest negotiating for? Higher hourly versus stipends versus CEUs?
We always would try to negotiate, if possible, for higher non-tax pay. As far as like stipends, we want to max out the stipends if possible, because that way we make more money and the travel company has to pay less taxes on our behalf, so they're able to offer us more. And that can be in the form of CEUs, it can be in the form of housing, meals, incidentals. But rarely ever do we want to increase our hourly taxable pay unless the stipend's already maxed out, there's no more reimbursements to be had, which we've run into that situation before, usually in lower cost living areas. So usually we want to go with maxing out all the reimbursements before we would ever think about increasing the hourly pay.
Yeah, and usually a good recruiter can help you to navigate the situation.
And usually the company is much more willing to increase those reimbursements than to increase your hourly pay as well. So usually go with that first.
Yeah. Okay, so Kyle wants to know, he's giving us some information. The average is 20 to 25% after they take out the labor burden cost. So for example, workers' comp, professional liability. So therefore the average they take is 28 to 52% of the total amount the facility is paying for the clinician.
That can be, usually, at least in our experience, for example, I've had bill rates that I saw, like the one I was talking about where I opened the bill from the travel company to the facility. The bill rate there was $60, and I was getting paid, I think it was like, my blended rate was about $46 an hour. So I mean, the company was, I guess, what is that?
What was it, 46 out of 60?
Yeah. That
It's
would
only
be
24%.
24%, and that job was through a VMS. So it just depends. I would say it's pretty rare that a company's going to be keeping a total of 50, but yeah, somewhere in the 20 to 30 with a VMS, it might be as high as 35. But
Yeah,
but it depends.
I'm not sure about that. That hasn't been my understanding, but maybe Kyle has heard differently.
Yeah,
Okay.
and it could vary on like specialties as well, as far as like nursing or therapy or whatever.
Okay, let's see. Inca asked for recruiters. We'd be happy to send you some after this if you'd be interested. If anybody else is interested in recruiters that we work with, just comment recruiter and we can give you some information after the video. Quintez says, do you suggest asking for a higher pay when getting a contract extension?
Definitely. We wrote an article about this we can link to, and I think did we do a video on that?
I'm not sure.
If we haven't, we're going to do a video on that, but we'll link to an article we wrote there. We always recommend getting an extension bonus of some sort, and usually we would recommend trying to get an extra equivalent of $1 to $2 per hour of pay. So say you take another 13-week contract, 40 hours a week, that is 520 hours that you're going to work. So you want to be somewhere between an extra $500 to $1,000 in total. That might be in the form of a bonus, it might be in the form of a reimbursement for travel costs to and from home if you're taking a break between contracts or between the contract and the extension, or it could just be an increase of $1 or $2 an hour on your hourly rate.
Yeah, and usually the recruiter will tell you whatever they gave you in the beginning, like if they give you relocation costs or licensing or what do you call it, like drug tests and stuff like that, the onboarding type stuff, the fees they had to pay up front in the beginning, that's what they can loop back in and pay you again on the extension because they took that off the top in the first go around.
Yeah, so those upfront fixed costs that they had, they don't have to pay those again. So
yeah.
Another question.
Quintez wants to know about traveling internationally. So, good question, Quintez. So we are not traveling for work right now. We're just traveling internationally for fun. So we've utilized the fact of being travel therapists within the U.S. to be able to take more time off and afford to travel just for fun. So we're not working right now.
We use the higher flexibility with having contracts that end and having unlimited time off after a contract ends, as well as the higher pay to just take time off and travel ourselves.
But it is possible to work internationally as a therapist in certain countries. I think it's easier in countries like the UK and like Australia, New Zealand, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of information on that, unfortunately. It is more complicated, and there are only certain travel companies, so not your standard ones.
We've also seen, I can't remember where I saw this a while back, but some company was advertising international travel jobs, and they said that you had to agree to work with them for an entire year or something, because I guess the process is so much more difficult. Getting you credentialed and everything.
You mean the travel company?
Yeah, the travel company.
Yeah, and that was just one particular country or company. So it is a lot more complicated and it's not as common.
Yeah.
So typically we're just talking about taking travel jobs within the U.S., but it is possible, and there are therapists who have done it. But you can work fairly easily, not quite as complicated in the Virgin Islands or in a U.S. territory.
Yeah.
It's more complicated than the regular 50 states, but it's not as complicated as another country. Okay. Nina says, thank you. This is a very helpful video. Thanks again. You're very welcome. Okay, so it looks like that's all the questions that we've got. If you guys have any more questions after this, please feel free to comment below or send us a message. If anybody's watching on the replay, we'd love if you would give us a thumbs up, leave us a comment below.
Yeah. So next week we're going to try to do Sunday again, I believe. We're actually going to be back in Spain next week. We're going to be in southern Spain. I don't know exactly where we'll be, but we've got a few stops in southern Spain. So we'll be in Spain. Hopefully the internet connection will be pretty good, and as long as it's good, we'll do another live video.
Yep, so we will update you guys on our page this week, Travel Therapy Mentor. If you're not already following our Facebook page, we would love if you would go to follow our Facebook page. We try to do these videos every week on travel therapy topics. Like we talked about, we are traveling out of the country right now just for fun. We're traveling all over Europe for the next, it was 15 weeks total, so now we've got 14 more weeks that we'll be out of the country. So just as long as we can get good Wi-Fi connections and everything and the timing works out, we'll try to continue to do our videos every week on Sunday
Yeah,
nights.
and I'm biased, but we've had some pretty cool pictures lately. So we try to post pictures of the things that we see and along this trip. So
It's really hard not to get good pictures
yeah,
when you're in a
Portugal
place
and Spain
as,
are beautiful.
yeah, as beautiful as this. It's been amazing.
Yeah.
So thank you guys so
Yep.
much for tuning in and for engaging with our video tonight.
We'll see you next week. Thanks for
All right.
watching.
Bye guys.
Bye.